Is doing a PhD the right thing for you? In the early 2000s, I was thinking of the PhD as a launch pad to my career in critical care, taking care of critically ill children. I thought it could make a difference and could really help build my academic credentials. I was thinking a PhD could really make a difference and help me enter the academic ladder, and thought it would be a great opportunity to work university and clinical streams. But it wasn't to be, and went to a couple of interviews, and I wasn't successful. So I finished my clinical training, and I still was keen to undertake a degree of high level research. So then I finished my journey on the clinical side, and I thought, okay, let me start my consultant career, which in the USA would be called an attending career. Let's see where that leads me, and see if there's an opportunity to develop a research program. And then I started that research program, but unfortunately, despite being closely affiliated to university, the project I chose was actually quite a challenging one in genomics. And in fact, this is what I've found throughout my career. I've actually, especially in terms of research, been maybe 5 or 10 years ahead of the curve. So the kind of area that I was working on was genomics of sepsis, particularly looking at messenger RNA. And the laboratory just couldn't assimilate my information. They couldn't express the messenger RNA in the quantities needed. And so it seemed at the time that my project was a dead end. But I persisted, and finally I found a postdoctorate worker who was keen to help me go through my samples. So I had ethical approval for a sepsis study, and he helped me out, and he was very, very good. And he started to use a new technique for the expression of messenger RNA, and that worked amazing. And we started seeing some amazing results. Unfortunately, though, he became ill and unfortunately couldn't continue. And so then I was left with all these samples, and then without funding as well. So eventually I had to find a colleague, whom I did, in London. And we moved the samples from Nottingham down to London, and we got those all those processed. And some great work was developed. Unfortunately, it wasn't labeled as my work, which is fine. I had initiated the project. I'd taken the ethics approval, and I've done anything. But that last bit of work, which is also essential, was undertaken by the researchers at a university hospital. But the great thing about messenger RNA work is that they were able to publish the data with me as one of the co-authors. We uploaded the data, and it was the same data that I was able to visit at a different time. So I then embarked on a period of education, an MBA, because I felt that was very important for me to be good in management, to be able to offer better processes for impact for patients. So I finished that, and then I went back again to trying to get onto a doctorate program. I then went to Sheffield, and with the help of a wonderful colleague, started to grapple again with the data. And it was a neurologist who had also just finished his PhD, who put me on some really interesting ways of processing data and some interesting mathematics. And I'd also learnt the R programming language at this time as well. And then I applied that work to this data, and it seemed very, very interesting. I thought there could be mileage here. In terms of my clinical career, of course, my clinical work had precedent, because that's where I was earning my money, and that was where my focus was. So I then moved to the United Arab Emirates, and started to set up a children's ICU, and did that for a few years, and then came back to this whole idea of doing a PhD once again. So, this is now like the fourth attempt, and there was much more material now available on YouTube. There were some amazing stories from people on taking the doctorate journey, and also one or two very senior professors, of which, for me, Tara Bramazon was seriously amazing. If you look at her videos on the doctorate process, you will appreciate many facets are really important in terms of the PhD. So I watched these videos, and I realized the only person that was impeding my forward direction in terms of the PhD was myself. So I came up with some ideas of how I could do the work, and I started applying. Being based in the UAE, I started applying in the UK, and a number of the great institutions in the UK that wanted me back in the UK to be able to undertake a doctoral program. I was lucky though, and I managed to get linked to somebody, Professor Amir Hussain, senior professor in computer science, and I approached him. I said, how about it? And he was very, very supportive. So I approached him, and he said, why not? Let's give it a go. So I started the program, and now it was 2021. And that program, fast forward 4 years, I was able to complete my PhD. In fact, I did it in 3, but the last year I just took it a little bit easy. I was already doing full-time work, and work was getting busy. But at the same time, I wanted to have the ability to make sure the doctorate had an impact. So I wanted each of my chapters to be published as papers. So I slowed down the process because, I was self-funding the doctorate as well, so I could do that. And the university allowed a four-year program period. And that was it. I was able to publish the papers, and some of them were impactful. And in fact, one was so popular, it was one of the most downloaded papers in artificial intelligence and machine learning in sepsis. In one of the journals, Shock, I was actually invited to Boston on my own expense to give a talk at the 48th Shock Symposium in Boston, USA. That was amazing. So I finished my PhD, and actually the question then surfaced again during my PhD interview, PhD exam, Viva. And I was asked, well, why was I so passionate about doing the doctoral process? And I said basically it was a way for me to discover new knowledge. But I knew as a worker in intensive care, children's intensive care, I could impact one child at a time. But if I could come up with some new novel thoughts, ideas around sepsis management using the new genomics and omics, maybe I could have more of an impact. And that was a really great introduction to my Viva, and that went well. And hopefully I'll have a chance to talk about that in time. And if you want to know more about my PhD process, do follow my other videos and subscribe below, and we'll keep you updated. Thank you.